It gives me great honor to welcome Mayor Willie L. Brown, Jr., and yes, I'd work for him again.
Let me ask, I can't take that home with me, right? You walked away with it. I want to make sure. I am, of course, delighted to be again in Rossmoor. And you are correct, Ms. Hartley, there does appear to be more people here this time than last time. And I'm guessing that I'm flattered that I would be able to think that they came to hear me. But when I arrived here about 30 minutes ago, it was 105 degrees. So now I know why some of you are in this room. It's the coolest place and it's the time period. It was just last week in San Francisco, last weekend ago, when we hosted for the first time the State Democratic Central Committee Convention. You would think that San Francisco being a stronghold, there's no such thing as a Republican in San Francisco. Or at least nobody will admit being a Republican in San Francisco. In spite of that reality, there had never been one state Democratic convention. The party had never met as a state party in San Francisco. And I wondered aloud, why not? And I raised hell about that. And I was finally told, because the people who do the conventioneering and all those kinds of things in San Francisco knew that the Democrats probably couldn't afford the hotel rooms. And so they never had a convention in the city. I said, well, what has now changed? Just like everything else in San Francisco, we now have half of the Democrats throughout the state are hooked up in the tech world, and they can now afford hotel rooms in San Francisco, and so they showed up. Although, as you may or may not know, we did have the national convention in San Francisco in 1984, when Mondale was the nominee, and when the first woman was on the ticket, you recall that, and we had an incredible convention at that time. I must tell you that the reference to my inaugural party pales into almost insignificance at the kind of party that I gave for that national convention. I took over 2 piers in downtown San Francisco, Pier 43 and Pier 45, and I converted the interior of those piers into a replica of the significant activities and events in California. I had a place where you could go farming, check out what happens where we grow from down in the Central Valley. I had a Golden Gate Bridge with water, actually, so that you could move, if you wish, without going to the real Golden Gate Bridge. I had part of downtown San Francisco. I did Union Square, and at that time, Union Square actually had some stores in it, unlike today where it's not what it used to be. But I had I. Magnus and Joseph Magnus and the City of Paris and Bullock and Jones. I had them all right there in that particular facility. And I had Carlos Santana performing in that facility, Carlos fans, and I had a number of other. I had Sylvester performing in that thing. It was an incredible series of activities and events, and it was the most difficult ticket to get access to. And that was 1984. I think we're going to finish paying for it in about 2 years, if we're fortunate enough. It was outrageously most expensive thing that we have ever tried to do. But the city benefited. Everybody had a great time, and people are still talking about it. If they have another national convention, I'm going to insist, now that you are the largest Democratic club on the universe, I'm going to insist that they do something at Rossmoor. I've told I've told many of my colleagues who in the world of politics about my visit with you a year ago. So, well, what are you running for? Well, at the moment, I'm not running for anything, except that now that they have 23 candidates, and they got 23 candidates for the nomination, as you know. And if you've done any ancestral collection and what have you, I had dinner with Charlotte and George Schultz last Thursday night, and they presented me with an ancestral chart, and it was 23 in me, which I thought was really cool. And they had the names of all. And I don't know, maybe you don't read the Chronicle, or you do read the Chronicle. I hope you do on Sunday, and because I write for the Chronicle on Sunday, and so forth. I started that process in July of '08. And at that time, I knew that I had about, maybe until Obama was elected, but that was it. I knew it was going to be over the day Obama was elected, because the Chronicle, we have a funny relationship, and we had a funny relationship for many years. But that was '08. I still write every week for the Chronicle. And so far, they have published everything that I have had an occasion to write. Well, today, they did something that I wished I had thought of, and that was based on the number of candidates who showed up. 14 of the prospective nominees showed up for the state Central Committee Convention in San Francisco. And if any of you were there, you got to know that it was fun for 2 or 3 of the people really were interesting human beings to listen to. Most of them were not, but 2 or 3 of them really did make a great impression. For an example, when they had it laid out really well. They started. I led off. I'm not a candidate, but I led off. They wanted to create they wanted to create something. I'm not exactly sure what I was supposed to do because I have no title. I had no club. I just write a column. That's all I do. And but they had me set the stage for everybody to follow. Then they had Mayor Breed do the welcoming on behalf of the city. Then they had Governor Newsom. And then they had all of the Democrats holding office in the state, or at the state level, before they got around to the candidates. And then they gave each one of the candidates 7 minutes each. And it was kind of interesting how they did that, because knowing that politicians have a real difficult time staying within the time frame. Whatever the time frame is, I guarantee you we violated, period. As a matter of fact, I was at some event to speak, and they said, well, you have 1 minute. And I said, that's about how long it takes me to get my name out. Well, these politicians were amazing in that they had no idea what the penalty was for exceeding your time. And when they finally got past Nancy Pelosi, after she spoke, then they start rolling out the candidates. And the first candidate started to go forward, and I noticed that the candidate seemed nervous. Well, if you were running for national office and you've been going throughout the country, it's difficult for me to see how you would be nervous after a measured period of time of doing these things. But I didn't understand fully why they were so nervous. So I turned to the guy that kind of managed everything. I said, what's so? He said, we didn't provide you with that annoyance, but we are doing it with everybody else. I said, what do you mean the annoyance? He said, on the podium, right in front, you saw that bar that was there? Yeah. He said, that bar is now lighted. And I said, why do you have it lighted? He said, because it counts the minutes, one after another, and it doesn't. And if you talk and you start to get a little distracted, and you become worried about whether or not you're going to be able to finish everything you want to say before that. Well, what happens when the light goes out? He said, when the light goes out, the mic goes off. And I said, and the mic goes off? He said, yes. And then the lights start blinking. And then music starts to play. And it drowns you out. You're finished wholeheartedly. And so what happened? They had a fellow who's donated a lot of money to the group of people collecting signatures to impeach Donald Trump, Tom Steyer. And Tom, great commercials. He really did really great commercials. I now know they must have rehearsed those damn commercials 50 times. They must have had several versions, and they must have done a lot of editing to get it so that he really did look like a sincere, ordinary person making a presentation. Well, man, did he blow the skirt off of everything connected with that impression, because he got up, he saw the microphone, saw, 10,000 people or so in the audience, and he started to speak, totally oblivious to that. He never got a chance to say one word about impeachment. He started talking about, global warming. He started talking about trade. He started talking about everything that he had no knowledge of or no business. He should have been up there discussing how he spent all that money collecting all those signatures and how many signatures, and he should have closed by saying, how many of you signed? And to see whether or not they did. And that would have been impressive. But no, he just decided that, there are only 14 in here and there are 23 of them. Maybe I'll be number 24 or something. I don't know what the hell was on his mind. But it was embarrassing because suddenly he was standing there waxing eloquently, and nobody was hearing him but me. He had just run up. And then the other collection of people, one in particular was impressive because each of the candidates had somebody introduce them and bring them on, totally unaware that part of that was a use of their time. And it's not unlike what happened many, many years ago. When I first started out in this business, we had a convention in Los Angeles, and we were trying our best to elect a Kennedy to the presidency, and we had this big event in one of the large arenas in Los Angeles, and they decided to show diversity. And so they asked a black preacher to do the invocation. They wanted to broadcast this whole presentation by Kennedy as, in a way in which we'd get coverage. And in those days, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all the things that we have today to reach people, but we did buy TV time. And we wanted the TV time to start directly at 8. And so they put the preacher on at 1 minute of 8 to do the invocation. At 12 minutes after 8, he was still doing the invocation. From that point on, no Democratic convention has ever had an invocation again. You learn lots and lots of things. And so these candidates, when they had people bringing them on, was taking up some of their time. Elizabeth Warren, the person that Trump always calls Pocahontas, she was watching the whole thing, and she saw 2 or 3 of her colleagues fail miserably by having somebody else take up part of their time. She raced out there and, on her own without being introduced at all. And she yelled, "I'm Elizabeth Warren and I have a plan." Everybody knows everything she says now is "I have a plan." But it was really impressive because people laughed, half of them laughed, half of them believed she had a plan. And a combination of the two was just impressive. And then And then later on, they had the MC for the whole event remembered that there had been horror in Virginia Beach. People had been killed by a fellow employee and et cetera, or the day or so before. And we had not done anything to acknowledge that. And so the master of ceremonies, just ahead of a Booker coming on, Cory Booker was coming on to speak, and just in front of Cory Booker stands and says, "Can we have 1 moment of silence, please? 1 minute of silence, please, in memory of the people at Virginia Beach." And for the first time, the place absolutely went silent. Nobody moved, nobody rattled a paper, nobody did anything. Cory Booker is smart enough to recognize that that was a golden opportunity. And so he waited patiently, and then when the master of ceremonies says, "And now, Cory Booker." Cory Booker stepped up, he had his speech in his hand, and he said, "You know, it would be highly inappropriate for me to be given the speech that I've written. Let me tell you where I am and where my head is. It's exactly where yours was a minute ago." And then he walked people through the many assassinations and the many massacres and the many killings that have taken place in this nation. And he aroused more interest probably than almost anybody else. All the other candidates were, really insignificant in every way in terms of their presentation. They just didn't have a hook in which to get people's attention. That may be the definition of where we are as a party in terms of what we do. Because in this week, in Iowa, we have 19 of our people who are running. 19 are all there. Now, I do not understand why anybody bothers to go to Iowa. I wouldn't. If I was running, I wouldn't go down there. Why would I do that? That state never votes for Democrats. That state never has any decisive role in whether or not you should get elected. I'd think a little more practical. I'd be someplace like here, where there might be somebody who actually was interested in what I'd have to say and might ultimately vote for me and might be helpful. Well, that's not the case. Everybody goes there, and then they're going to go to New Hampshire after that. Again, a place where we really don't count and where they don't count very much. But what is fantastic this time in the process, California is going to be in the mix, because in the early part of the spring, in previous years, we've had to wait till summer when it was practically all over. Now, we're going to be a part of the weekend and the Tuesday when people are going to really say where we think things really are in terms of who should be the nominee. Now, in San Francisco, Biden did not show up for that convention. And I got a call this morning, Biden is not going to Iowa either. And somebody said, "You got to comment on that." I said, "Yeah, I think he's wise. You can be overexposed, and you might not want to be overexposed, particularly when you've been Biden as long as you've been around that long, and you've failed twice so far in your process of trying to become the president, and you're not terribly sharp as you need to be, and you've been in the U.S. Senate for 30 or more years. You've been vice president for 8 years. You've held other positions. It's almost certain that during the course of your life expectancy, you must have taken a position and had a position on almost every issue. And as things unfold, that comes back to haunt you. You got to be in a position where you either lay it out early enough so people get the impression that you have changed, or you got to be prepared not to have to answer any questions about it. Biden is choosing not to have to answer any questions about it, because I think he's probably forgotten what he actually has done, because he's been around a long time. So and I'm not sure that he was as swift as he needed to be at the time that he did it, and so that always creates a problem. Although you should know that I really have said in my column that I think that the Democratic ticket that may be able to challenge Trump would be Biden and Harris. Those are the two that I think may very well have a better shot at beating Trump if Trump can be beaten. I'm not sure Trump can be beaten. My formula, however, so that you're not totally disappointed, my formula is Trump needs to be tried. I do not believe that Nancy Pelosi is wrong when she says impeachment is not the route at the moment. You don't have enough information supplied really to make impeachment really work. And so what did I do? Over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm going to do a whole column on this, I think, and that is that how do we get the state of the nation as riveted as the state of the nation became in the middle 70s when Richard Nixon met his fate and had to leave, otherwise he thought he would have been impeached. Well, it seems to me the circumstances are such that this nation got the information about what President Nixon had done. I don't think this nation fully understands and knows what Donald Trump has done. Yes, we have a lot of information on almost an hourly basis about him in every way, but I don't think the kind of things that would ultimately and should ultimately defeat him have been on display. And so therefore, I had the few staff people that I still have some contact with, I said, let's try to figure out how we get Donald Trump tried. We thought about it, and we've come forward. One of our friends at Harvard reminded us that if you go back in history, you will know that Andrew Johnson, when he faced the possibility of being impeached, how did they do that? It was very simple. They said, the House, forget all these hearings that you're going through. Why don't you do what you need to do to get a list of charges and let the House try Donald Trump? Now, most people would say there is no basis for that, and they would be right. There is no procedural basis for it, but there's no procedural basis that blocks it either. And if, in fact, you can cause the nation to become more conversant with the conduct of Trump, you can take the Mueller report and literally find a series of witnesses for each one of the obstruction of justice and the other kinds of things that Mueller talked about, in which he concluded that, in fact, all of these things were such, but they were not where he, based on his mandate, could issue charges, and he thought the Congress should proceed to address it. Nancy and the folk on the Democratic side, in some cases, have been talking about an inquiry on the questions so that you can determine whether or not there's a sufficient amount of evidence for impeachment. I say, and my colleagues, we're looking through, let's ignore that piece. Let's put Donald Trump on trial. He won't show up as a witness. He'll be in absentia, but the whole nation will begin to understand when they hear the individual witnesses under oath that have come from the 448-page Mueller report, and in which they testified that caused Mueller to write what he wrote about the multiple examples of the obstruction of justice. It will be riveting, I suspect, for all of us to hear that, in particular, if we remove the membership from asking questions and we put talented persons who can cross-examine witnesses that you see happen in the courtrooms that you see happen on TV with some regularity. There's precedent for that. In the Kennedy administration, Bobby Kennedy cross-examined the head of the Teamsters, Jimmy Hoffa, at that time. He was general counsel to that particular Senate committee, and he cross-examined. They didn't have the senators, who are not skilled in most cases. of doing that kind of cross-examination, but Bobby Kennedy did a great job. Well, if you'd bring on somebody with the skills of a Kamala Harris as your counsel, asking each witness all the questions and all under oath, and you took each one of the incidents that Mr. Mueller talked about that represented obstruction of justice or other violations of the law, you could build an incredible case against Donald Trump. And in the end, you could announce that we are not barred from exercising in saying our opinion on whether or not we think he committed crimes. We do think he committed crimes, and we'll now literally send in all of the material. And we're forwarding everything we have, all the tapes, etc., over to the U.S. Senate, telling them you now have a collection of evidence that represents the opportunity for you to proceed. And believe me, if you don't proceed, we will vote on the basis of impeachment, but only because we have accumulated the evidence. In the Nixon case, I remember so clearly. As a young kid, so to speak, politically, Barbara Jordan, some of you may remember, from Texas, she did that 12 or 14-minute presentation of what the evidence was against Richard Nixon. And then in the process, a number of the people who testified, including John Dean, proceeded to acknowledge what Nixon had done. A combination of all those things resulted in Richard Nixon resigning and moving on. I suspect that Trump is not going to be smart enough to leave before the hangman's noose shows up from the standpoint of removing him from office. But what will it do for us? It will establish, I think, in the minds of the voters in this nation, just about the time they're ready to cast their ballots in 20, they will be in a position where not only will Biden and Harris might be able to win, but some of the other of the many candidates that we have may be able to win. When you see the Chronicle, if you've got it today, go look at the cartoon that they did. And they have 14 of our folk who showed up in San Francisco, and they have a little indication of what each one of them would like to have happen or have said. For an example, the guy Delaney, one of the candidates, said that, who am I? And, and a whole series of others. And of course, Saunders said something to the effect that I have a message, and before he could complete it, the next frame had Elizabeth Warren saying, "It's my message." And they had another one where Kamala Harris was tapping, "Is this on?" It was amazing, the number of folk that they had, and it was really it's quite humorous. So read that. Combination of all those things, we do need to elevate the level of dialogue in this nation, the awareness of Trump and what he did do and what he is doing and how he's done it, and we need to get it away from the allegation of fake news. We need to get it away from the places where it currently is, because it's not resonated with the public in a way that gives us the opportunity to be more optimistic than I currently am about whether or not he can be replaced. In his first run for the presidency, in June of 2015, when he announced that he was running, there were 14 Republicans who said they were running as well. I said in my column, I believe that he would win the nomination. And then I subsequently said in my column, after he had won the nomination, as things unfolded, I really did think the Democrats, we Democrats, were not prepared to do what we needed to do to win. And why did I say that? I said it because we were doing traditional kind of campaigning. We were not doing the campaigning where we were penetrating and reaching voters who, in many cases, would become voters because previously they were there and no one had ever caused them to vote. Well, we didn't do that in a way that caused them to go to the polls, nor were we smart enough to run a campaign in each one of the states, independent of what we were doing nationally. We need to replicate that concept in a way that will allow us to, in fact, produce a result that will defeat Trump. And I think a combination of that process could very well do that. And I hope it starts with raising the question about whether or not we actually put Trump on trial. If we could put Trump on trial in the way in which I've defined it and described it, I think we would be in a place where every day each one of us would be talking about what the evidence shows in terms of his absence of credibility, absence of qualifications, and absence of all the things that a president should have. And we would not have to wait for what causes us not to go over to the Senate. And I suspect if the volume of evidence was as great as I think it will be, the man who is standing in the way in the Senate and has made it very clear that he has presupposed what the evidence would show, and therefore he is not of the mind to have any reason for any hearings. And he, under the rules, doesn't have to schedule the hearing on the impeachment question. Well, on my watch, Nancy Pelosi, running the House, can schedule the trial of Donald Trump. And you can see how we could hype that for days, for weeks, for months. We could have people listen. We could have people wanting very much to listen in. And believe me, I intend to put it together in such a way that it becomes, I think, a mantra for Democrats nationwide. And this is the first time that I've mentioned it anywhere. So I'm going to say I heard it at Rossmoor. Somebody gave me the idea over at Rossmoor. Some of these very smart retired people hanging out in Rossmoor and doing some research discovered that this might be an avenue on which we could go. And with that, let me finish so that you can ask some questions, because it's always far more enjoyable for me if I'm given the opportunity to respond to the questions that are on your mind, because there's no way for me to know what's on your mind, and there's no way for me to continue to talk not knowing what's on your mind. So let's get to, you've not been listening to me at all, huh?
We're ready for it whenever you tell us.
Yeah, let's go.
Great.
Right there, make sure.
I really like the analogy to Richard Nixon, but the difference is there was no Fox News then. And it's not clear to me how you get the people who watch Fox News to watch anything other than Fox News. And they won't cover what the House is doing.
Well, let me tell you, I think there are a sufficient number of people in this nation that don't watch Fox News that we need to talk to about the news they do watch and hopefully motivate them to watch our news. That's why my concept of the trial of Donald Trump has so much potential flavor in it for me. Because believe me, Fox News, being as unprincipled as they are in many cases, we build enough of a momentum. It won't take them long to start covering that. And I don't really care whether they cover it or not, because I am not trying to convince a Fox News voter or a Fox News listener to follow my leadership. I'm trying to convince all those people that didn't show up at the polls when Hillary Clinton was on the ballot. I'm trying to convince those people to show up, and the numbers are dramatically greater. Because after all, if you recall, Hillary Clinton did beat Donald Trump by more than 3 million votes. It just so happens that she didn't do it in 50 states. My concept of a campaign operation says that I want an individual campaign being run in every state, and I want it to be run in the language and in the things that are indigenous to that state, and I want to get away from trying to run a national operation. And I think the results would be, we'll celebrate the inauguration of Biden and Harris, so we'll celebrate the inauguration of Amy and Kristen, if they run together as a team. We'll celebrate everybody but Bernie.
Here's a question here.
Just a question. It can't be a big talk.
Well, I need to set it up.
That's a good question.
It seems to me that Donald Trump has been campaigning since he won the election. And most of the news stations give him a lot of publicity, and they say bad publicity is just as good as good publicity. So since we're so close to 2020, do you think it would be effective to go through that long process? And I'm a retired federal employee, and I know the process is very long. Should we just take the chances at the ballot box?
I don't think we have much of a choice. This is still the way in which, we decide everything practically in this country. I'm from a city in which there are 60,000 people living in that, including the children, and almost every issue, there's at least 1.2 million vote. So somebody is doing more than voting legally. And I think this nation is, in some cases, somewhat burdened with that. But I do believe that in 2020, the prospect for a victory must be based upon a whole new set of methods and means by which to get every state in this union to be a participant in the real selection process, rather than a distinct minority of voters in some states ultimately casting a sufficient number of ballots to defeat the will of the majority of the people in this nation. 2020 ought to put that to rest permanently, and if we execute correctly, we will.
I have a question here.
Mayor Brown?
Yes.
Hi, I'm over here. I'm a little concerned. It seems like you want to go after people who stayed at home, and that would make the difference. But I think there's a lot of people who don't like Joe Biden either, and may stay at home, maybe not as much as they did for Hillary Clinton, but Joe Biden is not really presenting himself in a very sharp fashion. And the folks in the states that love Donald Trump still love the naughty boy that he is. And I have a hard time understanding where an individual state campaign is going to change that.
Well, let me respond by telling you, yeah, there are people who have problems with Biden. I have problems with all 23 of those candidates. But I can assure you, any one of those candidates, for me, would be superior to anything connected with Donald Trump. And so therefore, I'm practical enough to know that I'm not going to get purity in any of them. I'm not going to get, expert performance from any of them. I do know that I'm going to get a very bad performance from Trump. And so I'm prepared to go with somebody who's almost there rather than somebody who is never going to be there. And Trump is in the category is never going to be there. And I love when you look in the Chronicle and you see one of the ads today, and Democrats suffer from this reality, and it is a guy from Texas, O'Rourke, and Beto, they have him saying, I almost beat Ted Cruz, and I can almost beat Donald Trump. Well, I'm not into almost anymore on the presidency. I want somebody whom I believe can beat Donald Trump. And at the moment, I think that Biden probably has the best shot of being able to do that. And I suspect that Biden versus Trump in a head-to-head, there is no way Trump is going to be able to outmaneuver Biden. That is not to say, be very clear, I think all 23, I think that we have, the 23, either one of them can outmaneuver Trump. But the problem is, how do we get the person who is outmaneuvering Trump to simultaneously cause other people to vote for his or her candidacy? We tried with Hillary, and it didn't exactly work. I think we've got to try a different flavor in a different form, and I think running a Biden, who was credentialed in every way, and I loved how Senator Harris responded, and I wish they'd stayed with it, when they asked her on television, what about a candidacy with you and Mr. Biden and Senator Biden? He said, well, she said, you mean Vice President Biden? Said, yeah. Well, I would think he is a very experienced vice president. It's a great response, a great response. But then her campaign tried to back off and say, well, she's really running for president. Of course you're running for president. But would you take vice president? Of course you will take vice president. And no question, if you can get on the ballot and you can get with a horse that can win the whole enchilada, that's what you should do. And I'm, at the moment, think that Biden probably is the best shot of doing that. And again, I tell you that not one of the 23 of them are flawless. They all have some issue, or some of them you don't even know their names. And in that regard, you're going to be hard put. We do know who Biden is. We know what he stands for in most cases, almost everything. We know that he has sometimes extracted information that wasn't his. So what? People have been doing that for years. I've done it forever, I suspect. And so his flaws are not ultimately as devastating as the flaws for some of the other folk, particularly since he is already a household name. And believe me, that household name, not as good of a household name as Hillary, but with less negative reaction. Hillary had a lot of negative reaction, even though she was extremely well known. I don't know anybody that dislikes Biden except the person that just said a moment ago they wouldn't vote for him. But I don't know anybody that dislikes Biden. He's a likable human being, not someone you might hire to handle your estate or anything like that. Well, he doesn't seem to demonstrate that kind of talent. I'm not even sure you'd hire him to lecture, but you would love to have him for dinner because he's entertaining.
Out to see all us old goats. I wholeheartedly agree with your trial plan. Would you agree with me that the evidence is already here? Forget redaction, the stuff that's in white. If we just had that out in the trial, then we could accomplish the mission. Would you agree with that?
I would totally and completely agree. And on the messaging issue, it would be much easier on a daily basis if our passing and greeting with each other contained some reference to something you just heard that occurred in the trial the day before of Donald Trump. That would be so much fun. Because the people who would be testifying, all of those people he fired, you could subpoena each and every one of them. Every one of them who quit, you could subpoena each and every one of them. Every one of them who's already gone to jail, you could secure, get each one of them. and any one of them who pleaded the Fifth Amendment, you'd be able to have a field day speculating on why they entered the plea in that way. And I tell you, it would just change the dynamics completely. He would not be able to engage in his name calling. He would not be able to engage in his fake news, because believe me, it wouldn't be fake news. It would be people testifying under oath, taking the Fifth under oath, and you wouldn't need judges making the decisions on whether or not evidence could be admitted. That would be something the committee that's listening as if they are the jurors, they would be the ones that would be listening closely. And believe me, the cross-examination of all of these pro-Trump people would be so dramatic. I would hope that we could generate as much attention as a Game of Thrones did when recently, when that situation went down. You'd have people discussing it, and that's the way it was, by the way, in the 70s. We all looked forward all day long to what was the next report. And since we are in a position today where we could literally have 23 candidates, I think only maybe 4 of them are dual in a state. The state of Colorado's got 2 people. The state of Texas has 2 people. The state of New York has 2 people, the mayor and Christian Gillibrand. But I think almost every other state only has 1 person from that state. And it seems to me, as Democrats, we ought to be able to extract out of the individual candidate. If you're not the nominee, you become responsible for your state. You stay in your state, you run your state, you generate the support because you previously have gotten elected in one fashion or another in your state. And if we were disciplined enough to operate that way, when the dust clears, 2020 would have been, as Frank Sinatra had often said, a very good year.
There's a question over here.
Yes.
Mayor Brown, in connection with your idea of trial, which is great, how would you, and why haven't the Democrat committee chairs in the House enforced these subpoenas? Why haven't they gotten the Capitol Police to go down there and drag that person's ass and get them in front of the committees and fine them every single day?
Well, I can't answer the question as to why they have not exercised the power that they really have. I'm guessing, however, that with Mr. Trump having named so many judges, they really fear being turned down by the courts when they attempt to enforce the subpoena power that they actually have. In the case of the trial, I suspect that the courts would be far more lenient in terms of their enforcing a subpoena issued to testify as a witness in a trial based upon the information that came out of the Mueller report. And if you did it that way, I'm going to guess that there'd be more judges willing to help sustain the ability to drag those people in and have them held in contempt if they did not participate, period, by responding to the subpoena.
There's one right here, too. There are a lot of hands.
Mayor Brown? Okay, am I
What
on?
do you propose to get the young people out to vote? And just anecdotally, why are you against Bernie?
Well, I really am a Democrat. And I really do think if you are a Democrat, either Bernie ought to sign up as a Democrat, or he should run as a social Democrat with that party. And he should have the nomination of that party, period. So I got real reservations about someone hijacking my party or attempting to hijack my party. That's my problem with Bernie. I love much of what he says about things. Many of his ideas are good ones, but the one idea that he does not want to relieve himself of, and that's he's going to be an independent no matter what. And I know that in the world of politics, as an independent, unless there's something extraordinary, you're not going to move too many legislative items. And I can't find legislative items that Bernie has moved in all the times that he's been in the U.S. Senate. And if you were measuring performance, legislatively speaking, Bernie wouldn't be in the first 18. Certainly he's voted for some things, but he has not been able because he's never built a relationship. In this business, you really do have to build a relationship. You have to start with somebody to second your motion. Then you have to move from there to a majority of a committee where your matter has been referred. And then you go from there to the next committee, usually the Finance Committee. And then you go from there, or the Ways and Means Committee. Then you go from there to the House and or to the body. And each one of those stages and steps, you demonstrate your ability to implement intelligent, earth-shaking policies that responds to the needs and the problems of people by having charted that course and having maneuvered the process to get you there. Bernie has frankly not done that in any way, and I'm pleased that his actions 4 years ago has inspired so many people to get into the race and to think they can do it and to think they can be there. And it just maybe there will be an opportunity for his inspiration to be recognized at an appropriate time. Let's say that if the candidacy becomes one of a combination of Elizabeth Warren and Buttigieg, they become the combination of the nominees, and each of them appropriately acknowledge that what prompted some of their involvement was Bernie Sanders' participation. My youngsters are supporting Booker, and the one of them supporting Buttigieg. That's a combination. So when you ask me the question, how are we going to be able to get the young people out, we're going to be able to get the young people and understand that the young people are as interested in my opinion, the young people are as interested in solutions to issues as we are, and age seems not to be the dividing factor, and we ought to treat it that way. We ought to be about answering and performing the questions and suggesting the solutions and marketing those solutions. And believe me, in the next campaign operation, in the state of California, there are 114 community college campuses and one online community college campus put there by Jerry Brown. 114 community colleges. It seems to me, with the collection of candidates from the 23, we ought to have a half a dozen of those people that would assume the responsibility to do absolutely nothing else except take the message of why we're to elect our ticket to that all those kids in that community college. There are 23 campuses of the state university system, of which I'm a person from. Those campuses have several thousand people that I suspect did not participate in each one of those campuses the last time around. University of California has 13 campuses. Just think, and I've not even referenced the private schools yet. Seems to me, among the 23, we've got the personalities that can actually go do the job of delivering the message. And the message would be very clear, the inclusionary process that reflects itself in the decisions that we're trying to make on behalf of people for now and in the future. And I think if we do it that way, and we ran the campaigns the way I described it, we wouldn't be dividing ourselves in such a way that we'd say we got to have something to appeal to young people. Young people are communicating in a most incredible way. I go to dinner with my kids, and I can't even talk to them. They're sitting there. They take pictures of the food. They take pictures of each other, and they post it. And it's amazing what they're engaging in. And all I know is that neither one of them is looking for a job, which kind of pisses me off because they really ought to be about trying to figure out how to survive after I'm gone. But they are not doing that because they don't think I'm going to leave. Well, it seems to me we ought to be about trying to get that crowd, those young people, on those devices. And believe me, if Tom Steyer can get that many young folk saying what they said and the kind of things that, as I described his presentation, if we fix it right in every state, there will be that kind of a movement. I know that young Castro out of Texas and Beto out of Texas, each of them are an attractive alternative for communicating with young people in this country. Stacey Adams out of Georgia is in the same category. And Nancy Pelosi was absolutely right when she said, we can take the House back, but we've got to be relatively practical in how we go about doing that. And she executed that program and that plan extremely well. And it started with selecting the right candidates and saying, without an apology, you know, you're a nice person, but you can't win. She can. So we're not supporting you, and you ought not to run. She ought to run. And she did that all over. And believe me, the state of California reflected itself handsomely. When you can take Orange County and move it from being all red to all blue, and you do it with you do it with people who in the past have been somewhat losers, but they did it in such a way that people went out and voted, and nobody said a word about any specialty for young folk. What they did is they went out and they delivered the message that needed to be delivered, and we won all over the state. We can just keep doing that, and what we can't afford to do is allow the riveted nature of somebody's fix on one personality that causes non-participation because that one personality didn't ascend. Hillary was the victim of that kind of decision-making. Right. When Bernie didn't succeed, many of the Bernieites stayed home, and Trump won. We can't allow that to happen again. We just can't allow that to happen again.
Mayor Brown, I want to do a time check. I want to do a time check for you. How many 1,000 more questions can you take? It's 5:30.
It's what?
It's 5:30.
Oh. I'm already past my time.
I know. No. You don't have a time. You're
yes,
fine.
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do. Well, let me tell you, I know I'd love to be able to stay forever and just keep answering questions. There's a precedent for that. I walked over to Oakland on last Thursday night, I think it was, and I went to a rally being done by Elizabeth Warren. And there were 7,000 people that showed up to hear Elizabeth Warren in Oakland. So now, how in the hell can that be? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As I watched it, Elizabeth Warren made her presentation and stayed there right in front for an hour and a half after she had finished speaking, she must have taken a photograph with everybody there who wanted to take a photograph. So I asked one of her people, that's unusual. They said, she does that all over the nation. Now, I had never heard anybody do that, and so I'm now touting that to my friends who are running. I'm saying, listen, be the last one, be the first one to arrive, and then be the last one to leave, because it may be that that might cause people to have a better impression of you. You don't have to run off to some other place. Well, now, I'm not running for a damn thing. And so I am going to run off to another place simply because I am obligated. I enjoyed my visit, as always. You're a fabulous collection of Democrats. Thank you very much.